Pittsburgh, 1924. Point Breeze District. Early morning. The air is filled with heavy dust from limestone and sandstone. The sound of sledgehammer blows drowns out the street noise. A group of workers methodically destroys the facade of the building that just a few years ago was called the architectural crown of Pennsylvania. This is not the demolition of slums or the clearing of a site after a fire. This is the deliberate destruction of Green Lawn, the personal palace of Henry John Heinz, the man whose name is already on millions of glass bottles around the world by this time. Stone by stone, the workers dismantled the chateau-style walls in French style, those very walls that were supposed to stand for centuries. Huge stained glass windows brought from Europe are smashed. Carved oak panels that masters polished by hand for years now lie in piles of construction debris, awaiting burning or hauling to the dump. Witnesses to this spectacle see not just the demolition of a house. They see a paradox that cannot be explained by the logic of the average person. The Heinz Empire is at the peak of its power. Factories operate around the clock. Profits are counted in millions of dollars. But the founder's home, the heart of this empire, is being destroyed, not by creditors or competitors. The order was given by those who should have preserved it as a shrine. The demolition documents are signed by the heirs, Howard, Clifford, and Irene Heinz, the blood children of the Ketchup King. Just 5 years ago, in 1919, in one of the bedrooms of this mansion, Henry Heinz took his last breath, confident that he was leaving his family not just real estate, but a family castle. He believed he'd created an American version of a European estate, where his grandchildren and great-grandchildren would play in the gardens among 10 greenhouses. He was wrong. For his children, Green Lawn turned out not to be a gift, but a curse. They called their father's dream a white elephant, a beautiful, gigantic, and utterly useless beast that devours resources. None of them wanted to live in a museum steeped in their father's obsession. They tried to give the mansion to the city. They tried to donate it to charitable organizations. But even for free, this palace turned out to be unwanted by anyone. The costs of heating and maintaining 30 rooms in the new economic reality frightened even the wealthy. The irony of fate is cruel. Heinz's red brick factory on the northern bank of the Allegheny River stands unshakably, like a fortress of industrialism. It will outlive the Great Depression, wars, and the change of eras. Henry Heinz's personal paradise, the place where he was a real, vulnerable human being, not a businessman, is disappearing from the face of the earth right now, under the blows of crowbars. In a few weeks, only a wrought iron fence and a lonely carriage house in the back will remain from the majestic estate. The land will be divided into small plots and sold to developers. The story of the man will be erased. Only the brand will remain. But to understand why the children so easily parted with their father's legacy, one must go back 50 years. One must understand from what clay Henry John Heinz himself was molded, and what tragedy made him turn a residential house into a golden cage from which his heirs dreamed of escaping. This is not a story of success. This is a story of how the greatest ambitions shatter against the silence of empty rooms. 1844, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The city that writer James Parton would call hell with the lid taken off a few years later. This is the place where day is indistinguishable from night due to coal dust, where snow turns gray before it even touches the ground, and where the air smells of sulfur and burning iron. It is here, in the family of strict German Lutherans, Frederick and Margareta Heinz, that a man is born who will one day decide to build a paradise garden here, shielded from soot by glass walls. Henry John Heinz was not an aristocrat. He did not belong to the East Coast elite. His philosophy was formed not in closed schools for gentlemen, but on 4 acres of garden in Sharpsburg, where he worked from the age of 8. While other children played, little Henry packed vegetables. By the age of 12, he was already a full-fledged trader, driving around neighbors with a cart full of produce. But in this seemingly ordinary biography of a hard-working immigrant hid a detail that distinguished him from thousands of other farmers. This detail: transparent glass. In the mid-19th century, the American food industry was a territory of wild deception. Producers added plaster to flour, brick dust to cocoa, and cheap turnips to grated horseradish. To hide the fraud, products were sold in dark, opaque bottles, green or brown. The buyer could not see what he was taking until he opened the jar at home. Henry Heinz, still a young man, made his first revolution, which became the foundation of his future greatness and his future home. He began selling his mother's grated horseradish in absolutely transparent glass jars. This was an unprecedented risk. This was a challenge. Transparent glass cost more, but it shouted to the buyer, "I have nothing to hide." This was not just a marketing strategy. It was a manifestation of his ego and his ethics. He believed that quality is visible to the naked eye. This obsession with visual perfection, purity, and transparency would later form the basis of Green Lawn's architecture, where light would become the main protagonist. But the path to the top was not a straight line. Before building an empire, Heinz had to endure complete destruction. 1875. The United States is gripped by the aftermath of the financial panic of 1873. The economy is collapsing. Henry's first company, Heinz Noble and Company, goes bankrupt. For a 30-year-old Lutheran raised in the strictest discipline, this is not just a loss of money. This is moral death. In the 19th century, bankruptcy was equated with theft. The drama of the moment intensifies in December 1875. Heinz is arrested on charges of fraud. Although he is quickly released, this day leaves a scar on him that will never heal. The man who dreamed of purity and honesty finds himself in the mud of public disgrace. Newspapers write about the collapse. Neighbors avert their eyes. He loses everything: house, furniture, reputation. He has nothing to feed his family, wife Sarah and small children. In his diary, he writes lines full of despair and humiliation. But it is precisely at this point of downfall that the Titan is born, who, 20 years later, will begin buying antiques across Europe. Heinz compiles a list of all his creditors, every name, every cent. He calls it his Book of Moral Debts. By law, he is not obligated to repay these debts after bankruptcy, but he vows to return everything. The following years are a story of manic labor. He cannot conduct business under his own name, so he works as a manager in his brother's and cousin's company. He works 18 hours a day. He introduces new products, expands the line, fanatically controls every stage of production. He turns the process of vegetable canning into a science. By 1890, Henry Heinz not only repays the debts, he becomes one of the richest people in Pittsburgh. But now it is a different man. He is no longer the naive boy with a basket of horseradish. This is a strategist who understood. To be respected, it is not enough to be honest. You need to be grandiose. You need to create symbols. His worldview transforms. Money stops being the goal. It becomes a tool for creating a perfect world around himself. He begins to travel, absorbing the architecture of Europe. He sees the castles of France, the estates of England, and understands he needs not just housing. He needs a monument that will prove to everyone, and the bankers who humiliated him, and the neighbors who whispered behind his back that Henry Heinz not only survived, he triumphed. He buys a plot in the prestigious Point Breeze district. This is the territory of old money, the place where bankers and industrialists live, many of whom looked down on the pickle seller. Heinz decides to settle among them, but not to blend in. He plans to build a house that will eclipse them all. In his head, the plan for Green Lawn is already maturing. It will be not just a house.
It'll be a fortress of stone and glass, filled with history that he himself never had by right of birth. He, the son of immigrants, will buy history. He will bring it from Europe in pieces, tapestries, vases, king's furniture. This was the classic conflict of new money against the old aristocracy, but with an adjustment for Heinz's personality. He did not want to carouse and throw wild parties like Gatsby. He wanted respect. He wanted to create a sanctuary for his family, a safe haven where the grime of Pittsburgh and the shame of the past could not penetrate. However, in this formula of success, there was one variable he could not control. His ambitions demanded time. And time is the only resource that cannot be canned in a jar, even the most transparent one. At the moment when he signs the documents for the purchase of the land in 1892, the clock is already starting the countdown to the greatest tragedy of his life.
To understand the architecture of Green Lawn, one must first understand the architecture of the marriage that became its foundation. In the world of Pittsburgh magnates at the end of the 19th century, wives often served the function of expensive decor, living proof of their husband's solvency, dressed in silk and French lace. But Sarah Sally Sloane Young was different. She was not a trophy, but a co-founder of Henry Heinz's very life. They married in 1869. She came from a respected family of Scottish-Irish Presbyterians, which, for the son of German immigrants, was a significant social lift. But it was not about status. Sally possessed what Henry lacked: quiet, unwavering emotional stability. When, in 1875, Heinz was crushed by bankruptcy and lay in bed unable to get up from shame, it was Sally who sat beside him. She did not reproach him for the lost house and sold furniture. She spoke of the future. This union of two worlds, German aggressive enterprise and British stoic restraint, became the axis around which the new empire began to revolve. By the beginning of the 90s, when the debts were repaid and the Heinz brand began capturing international markets, Henry and Sally made a strategic decision. They needed to leave the old district. The north side of Pittsburgh, where they lived and where the factory was located, was the heart of the industrial machine. Here the air was thick with soot, and the roar of machines did not stop even at night. Heinz loved his factory, but he did not want his family to breathe its waste. In 1892, he makes his main move on the chessboard of urban real estate. He buys the estate in Point Breeze. Point Breeze was not just a district, it was Pittsburgh's Olympus. Here, away from the smoking chimneys, people whose names sounded like hammer blows built their residences. George Westinghouse, Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Carnegie. Moving here was a statement. We are equals. But Heinz, true to his paradoxical nature, did not build a new palace on an empty lot. He bought an existing mansion that had previously belonged to Harry Hopkins and decided to transform it. The process of creating Green Lawn in 1892 began with an engineering feat that perfectly illustrated Heinz's character. Preserve the best, improving the rest. The old house was not demolished. It was jacked up and moved deeper into the lot to make room for grand additions. This was a metaphor for his entire life. He never crossed out the past. He built new floors upon it. Together with Sally, they began planning not just a house, but an autonomous world.
The project included what then seemed like fantasy: its own power plant in the basement, an air filtration system to protect the interiors from the ubiquitous Pittsburgh soot, and a complex heating system. This was a fusion of Victorian aesthetics and cutting-edge technology. Heinz, the king of preservation, wanted to preserve ideal family life. In the letters of that period, a tenderness rare for a stern industrialist shines through. He discusses with Sally the details of the future rooms, the choice of wallpapers, the placement of fireplaces. For them, Green Lawn was to become a place where their children, Clarence, Clifford, Howard, and Irene, would be safe. This was a project of love, materialized in stone and wood. Sally dreamed of gardens. Henry dreamed of walls that would protect these gardens. The social context of this construction was colossal. While other magnates built houses reminiscent of European palaces to hold balls and social soirees there, the Heinzes built a fortress for internal emigration. They did not seek to become stars of the social chronicles. They were deeply religious. Their Sundays were devoted to church, not champagne. Green Lawn was designed as a temple of family values, where every corner was to serve upbringing and comfort, not vanity. By 1893, the outlines of the dream had become reality. The house was covered in scaffolding. Hundreds of workers toiled on the facade. This was the moment of highest triumph. Henry Heinz, the man who 15 years ago counted cents, now stood on the lawn of his future estate, holding his beloved woman's hand, and watched his legacy grow. It seemed that fate itself had returned the debt with interest. But it was precisely at this point, at the peak of hopes, that the script of their lives prepared a cruel turn. The grandeur of Green Lawn, conceived as a hymn to their union, would ultimately become a backdrop for loneliness. While architects drew plans for luxurious living rooms where the family was to grow old together, Sally's biological clock had already begun its merciless countdown. The walls rose higher and higher, but the foundation on which Henry Heinz's soul rested, his wife, had already developed an invisible crack. This was a classic moment of ancient tragedy. The hero receives everything he dreamed of, a second before losing the meaning of possessing it. The house that was supposed to ring with the voices of a large family clan was preparing to accept a completely different acoustics. Silence, interrupted only by the ticking of hundreds of collectible clocks. If you stood in front of the gates of Green Lawn at the beginning of the 20th century, the first thing that would catch your eye was the unnatural purity for Pittsburgh. Behind the wrought iron fence, the city covered in soot and coal dust ended, and the territory of absolute control began. This was not just an estate. It was Henry Heinz's architectural autobiography, written in stone, glass, and exotic wood. The house was a complex structure in the French style with Tudor elements. 3 stories, more than 30 rooms, a complex roof system with turrets and chimneys that pierced the gray Pennsylvania sky. But the true essence of this building revealed itself only to those who crossed the threshold. Heavy oak doors cut off the roar of Penn Avenue. You entered the vestibule, and the first thing you sensed was the smell. Not the smell of food or tobacco, but a complex aroma of beeswax, old paper, and expensive varnishes. Underfoot spread an intricate mosaic, and overhead loomed a hand-painted ceiling. Every detail here shouted not of wealth, but of the owner's pedantry. Henry Heinz suffered from an obsessive compulsion for purity and order, and Green Lawn became the physical embodiment of this neurosis. In an era when most homes were lit by gas that left soot on the wallpapers, Heinz introduced electricity into every corner. He wanted to see everything clearly, without shadows. Moving deeper into the house, a guest entered an enfilade of rooms. each of which was a separate world. The Imperial Room was furnished with French furniture covered in gold brocade, which Heinz personally selected during trips to Paris. The walls were draped in silk. Here stood display cases, but not with dishes, but with history. This was the key feature of Green Lawn. It resembled a curatorial section of the British Museum more than a residential home. Heinz was obsessed with collecting. He collected not just beautiful things, but artifacts of human craftsmanship. Along the corridors and in special halls stood mahogany cabinets, behind the glass of which were stored carved ivory figurines, hundreds of them, brought from Asia and Africa. He could spend hours telling guests the story of each tusk, each master's chisel. But the most psychologically charged element of the interior was his collection of clocks. Antique grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, pocket chronometers from Switzerland, Germany, and England. They stood everywhere. Imagine that sound. The silence of the huge house interrupted only by the discordant ticking of hundreds of mechanisms. Every week a special master came to wind them. For Heinz, the man who built a business on efficiency and time management, this was symbolic. He tried to surround himself with time that could be controlled, enclosed in a beautiful case, and made to follow his rules. From the semi-darkness of the library, filled with rare folios, one could enter the brightest place in the estate, the winter garden. This was the soul of the house. 10 greenhouses adjoining the building and scattered across the plot created a unique microclimate. Here, under glass domes, orchids bloomed and exotic fruits ripened year-round, while dirty Pittsburgh snow lay outside the windows. Heinz, who started as a boy with a garden bed, never forgot the smell of earth. But here, in Green Lawn, nature was tamed. The plants stood strictly in rank and file, like jars of pickles on a store shelf. This was the triumph of man over the chaos of organic life. He personally spent his morning hours here before heading to the factory, checking every leaf for spots or diseases. On the second floor were the bedrooms. There were 7 of them, and each had its own bathroom, with the most modern plumbing of the time, an unheard-of luxury for the 90s of the 19th century. Heinz believed that purity of the body leads to purity of the spirit. The pipes supplying water were hidden behind marble and tiles, creating an illusion of sterility bordering on an operating room. A special place was occupied by the music room. The house had an organ installed. On Sundays, the walls trembled not from social gossip, but from the sounds of religious hymns. The family gathered around the instrument, and for a few hours, Green Lawn turned into a private church. There was no place for frivolity here. The paintings on the walls were either landscapes or portraits of ancestors and historical figures. No nudes, no modernism that could disturb the strict Lutheran gaze. This house was designed as a fortress for a large family, like a hive where everyone is busy with business and virtue. The dining room, capable of seating 30 people with a massive table of dark oak, awaited noisy dinners, children's laughter, and the clink of silver. But there is one detail that changes the perception of all this splendor. If you look closely at old photographs of Green Lawn's interiors, you can notice a certain frozen, museum-like coldness. The furniture is arranged too perfectly. The rugs are not rumpled. The things lie as if people are afraid to use them. This architectural masterpiece, conceived as a hymn to life and success, in fact became a monument to loss even before it was fully completed. The grandeur of the rooms designed for the queen of this castle, Sarah Heinz, turned into echoing emptiness. The psychology of the house changed instantly. From a cozy nest, it turned into a golden sarcophagus. In 1894, when finishing work was in full swing, when masters were applying the final touches of gilding to the stucco, and gardeners were planting rare roses, it was not life that entered the house, but death. And it was precisely this moment that turned Greenlawn from a simple, rich house into the scene of one of the quietest and saddest dramas in American business history. All these mirrors, meant to reflect the happy faces of the spouses, were now ready to reflect only the lonely figure of the man who bought everything except time. November 29th, 1894. Thanksgiving Day. In most Pittsburgh homes, tables are set, prayers and laughter sound. But in the Greenlawn mansion, an unnatural, cottony silence reigns, broken only by the hurried steps of doctors and the muffled whispers of servants. Outside the windows, a cold, damp November evening. Inside, in one of those very luxurious bedrooms meant to serve as a refuge for decades, Sarah Heinz is dying. She is 51 years old. The diagnosis, pneumonia. At the end of the 19th century, doctors called this disease the captain of the army of death. Without antibiotics, without artificial lung ventilation machines, even Henry Heinz's millions of dollars hold no power. All his fortune, all his factories, all his famous efficiency are powerless against the inflammation in the lungs of his beloved woman. He, the man accustomed to controlling every jar on the conveyor, is now forced simply to watch as Sally's breathing becomes ever more shallow. Death comes quickly. Just a few days ago, she was the mistress of this new palace, arranging flowers and vases and discussing Christmas plans. Now she is gone. For Henry Heinz, this is not just the loss of a wife. This is the amputation of part of his personality. Sarah was the only person who remembered his humiliation in 1875. She was the only one who saw in him not the pickle king, not an industrial giant, but a vulnerable dreamer. She was his moral compass. When this compass shattered, Heinz found himself alone in the ocean of his ambitions. It was precisely at this moment that the fundamental transformation of Greenlawn occurs. Before November 29th, it was a home. After, it turns into a mausoleum. The psychology of the space changes instantly. Luxurious living rooms, created for receiving guests and family comfort, become backdrops for one man's loneliness.
And here we see the birth of that very contradiction, that moral ambivalence which will define Heinz's life for the next 25 years. Instead of withdrawing into grief or retreating to a monastery, Henry Heinz begins to fill the void with things. His passion for collecting, which had previously been just a hobby, turns into a manic obsession. If he could not hold on to a living person, he will hold on to history. He begins buying up the past in wholesale lots. He travels to Egypt, Palestine, Europe, bringing to Greenlawn not just souvenirs, but entire cultural strata. Ancient mummies appear in the house. Display cases fill with the rarest clocks. This looks like an attempt to stop the time that treated his wife so cruelly. If you surround yourself with objects that have survived millennia, perhaps death will seem not so omnipotent. But there is also a dark, selfish side to this. Heinz becomes an absent father in his own home. His children, Howard, Clifford, and Irene, live in this museum with him, but the father increasingly turns into a monument to himself. He demands perfect order. He writes letters to the children with instructions, even when in the next room or on a trip. He loves them unconditionally, but this love becomes heavy, demanding, suffocating, like velvet curtains that are never opened. The outside world sees Henry Heinz as a philanthropist and progressive capitalist. And that is true. At his factories, he introduces revolutionary innovations, free manicure rooms for female workers because they work with food products, showers, changing rooms, canteens with hot food. He lobbies for the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, fighting unscrupulous competitors who poisoned people with chemicals. He appears as the patron saint of the working class, the voice of America's conscience. But return to Greenlawn, and you will see a different picture.
The man who cares so much about the nation's health cannot find warmth in his own home. His virtue becomes public, while his personal life, cold and sterile. The heirs grow up in the shadow of this greatness. Imagine Howard Heinz's childhood. Your father is a national icon. Your home is a museum where nothing can be touched. Your mother is a holy ghost, a portrait on the wall with whom father mentally converses every evening. From you, they expect not just obedience, but conformity to the scale of the legend. You have no right to error, because the family name on the factory facade obliges you to be perfect. The moral conflict here is subtler than in stories about cruel tyrants. Heinz is not a villain. He is a deeply religious man, leader of the worldwide Sunday school movement. He sincerely wants good. But his kindness becomes authoritarian. He builds paradise on earth, but in this paradise, it is very cold. The female figure that could soften the sharp angles of his character has disappeared. Sally was a buffer between his perfectionism and reality. Without her, Greenlawn turned into a golden cage. Heinz continues to expand the house, rebuild the greenhouses, add new rooms for new collections. This resembles an endless chase after the horizon. He tries to build an ideal world in which no one else will die, where things preserve their beauty forever. By the 1900s, the mansion in Point Breeze becomes a legend of Pittsburgh. It is called a palace. Newspapers write about it. Guests invited to formal dinners admire the mosaics and organ music, but they rarely notice the sadness in the eyes of the host who sits at the head of the table. He owns all this, but it does not bring him the joy that a simple dinner with Sally 30 years ago brought, when they were on the brink of bankruptcy. This tragedy prepares the ground for the future generational conflict. The children see how the house consumes their father. They see how things become more important than people. They see huge bills for heating emptiness, and in their heads, still unconsciously, a dangerous thought begins to form. This house is not our legacy. This house is Father. And when Father is gone, we will not need his shell. Thus, at the peak of Henry Heinz's greatness and moral authority, dynamite is laid within his family that will explode 5 years after his death. Greenlawn becomes a symbol not of family unity, but of its emotional disunity. The grandeur of the architecture hides deep human dysfunction. The house demanded life, noise, chaos, but received only discipline and memory of the dead. And the more Heinz tried to make the house eternal, the more he doomed it to destruction. Because the heirs did not want to live in a mausoleum. They wanted to live in the future, while Greenlawn increasingly anchored them in the 19th century, among shadows and dusty tapestries. May 14th, 1919. Pittsburgh wakes up in a new reality. World War I ended just 6 months ago. The Spanish flu, which took millions of lives, is receding, leaving the world in a state of post-traumatic shock. On this spring day, in his bedroom on the second floor of the Greenlawn mansion, Henry John Heinz loses his last battle. The enemy is the same one that took his wife 25 years ago: pneumonia. At the age of 74, the patriarch who built an empire on the idea of health and purity dies from the inability to take a breath. His death becomes a seismic shift for the entire clan. While the body of the Ketchup King lies in the coffin in the Great Hall of Greenlawn,
Surrounded by mountains of lilies and orchids from his favorite greenhouses, thousands of people pass by to pay their respects.
This is the last moment of triumph for the house. It fulfills its final function: decorations for state funerals. The walls, which have absorbed the silence of decades, for a few hours fill with funeral music and the whisper of Pennsylvania's elite. But as soon as the last guest leaves the wake and the hearse drives out through the wrought iron gates, the mansion plunges into a cold, sinister coma. And here the real crisis begins. The will of Henry Heinz was generous. He left stocks, money, instructions for company management, but he left his children, Howard, Clifford, and Irene, something much heavier than corporation management. He left them Greenlawn. Now Howard Heinz becomes the head of the family and business. He is 42 years old. This is a man of a completely different era. If Henry was a Victorian romantic who believed in paternalism and collecting antiquities, then Howard is a pragmatist of the 20th century. He views the world through the prism of efficiency, tax returns, and the oncoming jazz era. Howard enters his father's office. He sees not a cozy nest, but an accounting catastrophe. 1920 brings with it a new economic reality. Federal income taxation has been introduced, becoming increasingly aggressive. Maintaining a staff of dozens of servants, gardeners, stokers, and maids necessary for servicing 30 rooms and 10 greenhouses ceases to be a sign of status. It becomes a financial hemorrhage. Winters in Pittsburgh are harsh. To heat this stone palace with high ceilings requires hundreds of tons of coal. Bills for electricity, roof repairs, care for exotic plants, all this adds up to an astronomical sum. For Howard Heinz, Greenlawn turns into a giant liability. It is a white elephant, a sacred animal that cannot be put to work, but ruins its owner with its appetite. But the problem is not only in money. The problem is in psychology. Heinz's children grew up in this house, but they never felt it as their own. It was their father's temple and their mother's mausoleum. Living here further would mean living in a museum where every chair, every painting, and every statuette dictates its own rules. This would mean forever remaining the children of Great Henry, keepers of his dusty collections, instead of building their own lives. And then, a transformation of values occurs. Howard makes a decision that seems blasphemous, but in fact is an act of liberation. He decides that the father's legacy is not bricks and limestone. The legacy is ideas, charity, and business. The family begins the process of deconstructing the shrine. First, they decide the fate of the collections. What Henry collected for decades, priceless clocks, ivory carvings, jade, antique weapons, is not sold at auctions. The heirs donate these treasures to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. This is the key moment of transition. Private treasure becomes public domain. What was hidden behind the walls of Greenlawn and served the selfish consolation of one widower is now accessible to all city residents. Heinz's children intuitively understand. To preserve the memory of their father, the collections must be released from the prison of the mansion. But what to do with the building itself? In the early 20s, Howard and his relatives make a desperate attempt to save the architectural shell. They offer Greenlawn to the city of Pittsburgh as a gift. Take it, they say. Make a museum, library, community center here. The city's response sounds like a sentence. The municipality refuses. Officials look at the maintenance cost estimate and shake their heads. The mansion is too far from the business center, and the costs for its heating and repairs are unaffordable for the city budget. Even for free, this palace is unwanted by anyone. Then the Heinzes turn to charitable organizations and universities. The response is the same. Too expensive, too impractical, too old-fashioned. The era of the Gilded Age, with its gigantomania, is gone. The time of functionalism is coming. Huge, dark Victorian castles are now perceived as dinosaurs doomed to extinction. By 1923, the mansion stands empty. Servants are dismissed. Furniture is removed or covered with white sheets resembling ghosts. The garden that Henry was so proud of begins to overgrow. Greenhouses without proper care grow cloudy. Exotic plants die from the cold. The house dies slowly and painfully, turning into a set for a Gothic novel. Before Howard stands a cruel moral dilemma. Continue spending the fortune on maintaining an empty building solely for sentimentality? Or commit an act of patricide against memory to save the family's future? He chooses the future. This decision is not betrayal. It is a rethinking of what wealth truly is. Howard understands. Money should work for the living, not the dead. He formulates a new philosophy of the Heinz legacy. Instead of spending millions on maintaining one house for ghosts, the family will direct these funds to building something that will serve people for centuries. It is precisely during this period of crisis that the idea of creating the famous Heinz Memorial Chapel on the University of Pittsburgh campus is born. Howard decides to build a new monument to his father and mother, not a closed mansion behind a fence, but a church open to students and townspeople, a hymn to beauty and spirituality. But to build the new, the site must be cleared. The old must go. Greenlawn is sentenced. In early 1924, documents for the sale of the land to developers are signed. The deal's condition is harsh. The plot must be cleared of buildings. The house, built as a fortress for centuries, is declared construction debris. This is the climax of the drama. Henry Heinz's human tragedy, his loneliness, his attempt to buy immortality through things, collides with the merciless logic of time. His children love him, but they refuse to bear the cross of his architectural ambitions. They choose freedom from the past. The crisis is resolved not through saving the house, but through its destruction. And there is profound, though sad, wisdom in this. Sometimes, to preserve the spirit, the body must be destroyed. Greenlawn was the body of Henry Heinz's ambitions, and it aged immediately after his death. Now that the decision is made, only the technical part remains. Hire workers, bring in equipment, and give the command to demolish what Father built with such love. The circle closes. The boy who started with transparent jars to show the truth ends with his own house, full of hidden meanings, being erased from the face of the earth, revealing bare land. By mid-1924, only a gaping wound in the ground remains from Greenlawn. The grand mansion that Henry John Heinz built as an ark for his lineage was dismantled with surgical precision. This was not barbarism. It was disposal. Pittsburgh newspapers of that time sparsely mentioned the sale of building materials. Magnificent oak panels, carved fireplaces from Italian marble, stained glass windows, and plumbing were sold at auction to various buyers. Particles of Heinz's dreams scattered across the state, becoming fragments of other people's homes. Decorations in the living rooms of people who never knew either Sally or Henry. What was a single architectural organism turned into a set of spare parts. The land plot, these sacred acres in Point Breeze, was ruthlessly surveyed by surveyors. Where orchids once bloomed in greenhouses, and where Henry Heinz strolled in the mornings, checking his pocket watch, stakes appeared, marking the boundaries of new, much more modest possessions. The land was sold for development. In place of the palace, ordinary upper-middle-class homes grew, solid, boring, devoid of any grandeur. They stand there today,
and their owners, grilling barbecue in the backyards, have no idea that beneath their lawns lies the foundation of one of America's most ambitious architectural dramas. But the story does not end here. It transforms. Howard Heinz's decision to demolish his father's house became an act of alchemical transformation. By destroying the physical body of the legacy, he freed its spirit. The money and energy that could have gone to endless repairs of green lawns, rotting roofs, were redirected to creating a new monument. And this monument proved to be much more enduring. In 1938, 14 years after the demolition of the mansion, the Heinz Memorial Chapel opened on the University of Pittsburgh campus. This neo-Gothic building, with spires reaching for the sky and some of the world's tallest stained glass windows, became the true heir to Green Lawn. There is deep irony and great wisdom here. Henry Heinz built a closed fortress for his family, but his true memorial became an open space for all. The chapel does not belong to the Heinzes. It belongs to students, townspeople, tourists. Its stained glass windows encode the values of Henry and Sarah: education, culture, spirituality. The faces of heroes on the glass resemble family members, but they look at the world not from the dark rooms of the mansion, but through sun-pierced light. Howard Heinz guessed right. To make his father live forever, he needed to take him out of the house and return him to the people. If you walk today along Penn Avenue, past house number 7009, you will see ghosts of the past if you know where to look. From the majestic estate, only two elements survived. The first, the wrought iron fence. The black metal that once separated Heinz's utopia from the dirty industrial city still stretches along the street. It no longer guards anything except shadows and memories. It is a scar on the body of the district, the border of a non-existent kingdom. The second element is the former carriage house deep in the block. Today it is a private residence. The building where horses once lived and carriages were stored now serves as a home for people. It looks modest, but its brickwork and window shapes betray its noble origin. This is the only physical witness to the scale that once reigned here. But the main lesson of this story lies not in architecture, but in the philosophy of success. The fate of the Heinz Mansion is a mirror reflection of the fate of many great American houses of the Gilded Age. Recall F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Gatsby built his palace for one woman, for a dream that was unattainable. As soon as the dream dissipates, or dies, like Sarah Heinz, the house loses meaning. It becomes an empty shell. Henry Heinz made the mistake that many visionaries make. He tried to immortalize himself through personal space. He thought that Green Lawn would become a family nest, like European castles passed down from generation to generation. But he did not account for the fact that America is a country of movement, not stasis. Here, children do not want to live in their father's museums. They want to build their own. The paradox of Heinz's legacy is that his true monument became not stone masonry, but a glass bottle. In any supermarket in the world, from Tokyo to New York, you will find his name. The octagonal ketchup bottle that he invented, the label design that has hardly changed in a century and a half. This is his real castle. Millions of people enter this house every day. He built an empire on trust, purity, and product quality. And this empire outlived his mansion, his collections, and even the memory of his personal tragedy. Heinz's red brick factory on the banks of the Allegheny River, where work once bustled, has today been converted into elite lofts. People pay huge sums to live within the factory walls. This is history's final smirk. The place where Henry earned money proved more suitable for modern life than the place where he spent it. Industrial functionality defeated Victorian luxury. The story of Greenlawn teaches us that the attempt to build paradise on Earth is doomed if that paradise is locked behind a gate. Things, no matter how expensive they are, be it 18th century clocks or walls upholstered in silk, are merely decorations. They are perishable.
They require the warmth of human hands, not the cold of museum storage. Henry John Heinz died in the confidence that he was leaving his children a palace. The children demolished the palace to save their father's memory from oblivion and ridicule. They transformed dead stone into living charity. Today, when you take a bottle labeled Heinz in your hands, you hold a particle of this history in your hands. Behind this brand stands not just a corporation. Behind it stands a man who was born in poverty, rose to the top, built the crystal castle of his dreams, and lost it. Because life is always more complex than an architectural plan. The mansion is no more. But if you listen carefully, standing by the old fence on Penn Avenue, through the noise of modern traffic, you can hear the ghostly ticking of hundreds of clocks. They count the time that is beyond the control of billionaires or their heirs. Time that erases walls, but leaves names.